You cannot tell confidence from arrogance by watching someone when things are going well. In that moment, they look almost identical. Same posture, same steady voice, same easy eye contact. There is exactly one moment that actually tells them apart, and most people walk straight past it every single time without ever noticing it happened. By the end of this, you'll understand the three things happening underneath the surface that make confidence and arrogance feel so hard to separate at first glance, and you'll know the one specific split-second sign that reveals which one you're actually looking at, a sign that has nothing to do with how someone acts when they're winning. Here's what makes this so easy to get wrong. Almost everything we're taught to associate with confidence, steady eye contact, a strong handshake, a calm, unhurried way of speaking, is also exactly what arrogance has learned to perform. If you're judging based on surface behavior, you're judging based on the one set of signals both traits have in common. The real difference isn't in how someone holds a room when everything is going their way. It's in what happens the instant it isn't. The first thing happening underneath the surface is where each one gets its sense of worth from in the first place. Psychologists studying self-esteem draw a distinction between stable self-worth and what's called contingent self-esteem, self-worth that rises and falls depending on constant external proof, being right, being admired, being the most impressive person in the room. Confidence, in its genuine form, tends to sit on the stable side. It doesn't need a fresh transaction every few minutes to keep functioning. Arrogance usually sits on the contingent side, dressed up to look stable, when it's actually running on a kind of quiet, constant maintenance. Picture this. You're in a meeting with two people who both seem equally self-assured. One of them makes a point, someone politely disagrees, and they simply say, "That's fair, I hadn't thought about it that way," and move on without missing a beat. The other one, faced with the exact same mild disagreement, feels the need to explain, again, at slightly greater length, why they were right in the first place. Nothing about their tone changes. They don't raise their voice. But notice what just happened. One person's sense of self-worth didn't need the room to agree with them. The other one needed it enough to spend extra breath, making sure it did, even over something almost too small to matter. That difference is invisible if you're only watching for confidence. It only shows up the moment something threatens to take a small piece of the spotlight away. It shows up in other places too, once you know to look. You're getting feedback on a project from a colleague. One version of self-assurance hears, "This section could be tighter," and simply says, "You're right, I'll fix it, done." The other version needs you to understand first all the constraints that made the section the way it is, before it can accept the note at all. The feedback was identical. The armor around it wasn't. But even that isn't the layer that explains why arrogance can feel so much more brittle than it looks from the outside. Because there's a second thing happening, and it only shows up when someone else, not the situation, becomes the actual threat. The second mechanism is something researchers who study narcissism have started separating into two distinct tracks, admiration and rivalry. The admiration track is about actively building yourself up, charm, self-promotion, taking up space in a room. The rivalry track is different. It's what activates specifically when someone else looks like they might outshine you, and its whole function is to bring that other person down a notch, rather than build yourself up at all. Genuine confidence mostly runs on neither track because it doesn't experience someone else's success as a threat to begin with. Arrogance, especially under pressure, tends to lean hard into rivalry the moment it senses competition. Picture this. You're in a group project and a colleague presents an idea that's genuinely better than the one you brought to the table. A confident person in that room says, "Actually, that's a stronger direction, let's go with it," and means it, with no visible cost to how they feel about themselves 5 minutes later. An arrogant person, watching that same idea land well, will often find a small but specific way to undercut it. Not an outright dismissal that would look too obvious. A quieter version, a slight qualifier. "Well, it's interesting, though I'm not sure it accounts for this one edge case," said just convincingly enough that the room's enthusiasm cools by a few degrees without anyone being able to point to exactly what happened. That's rivalry doing its job quietly, and it's already uncomfortable. It shows up just as clearly outside of work. You're catching up with a friend who just started dating someone new, and they're glowing, talking about how well things are going. A confident friend says, "That's amazing. I'm really happy for you," and means every word of it. An arrogant one, listening to the exact same story, finds a way to mention, almost as an aside, that they've actually been getting a lot of attention lately too, redirecting the conversation back toward themselves before your good news has even finished landing. But it gets harder to spot than that, because this next layer isn't really about how people treat their equals at all. It's about how they treat the people who can't do anything for them. The third mechanism is the one most people never think to check, because it doesn't show up with the people arrogance is trying to impress. It shows up with the people arrogance has already decided don't matter. Social psychologists studying perception describe two separate dimensions people are judged on almost instantly: warmth and competence. Confidence tends to hold both at once. Arrogance quietly sacrifices warmth to maximize the appearance of competence, and it usually only spends that sacrifice on people it has already decided aren't worth the investment. Picture this: you watch someone at a restaurant. To the client sitting across from them, they are magnetic, generous with eye contact, quick to laugh, entirely present. Then the server comes to the table, and for 3 seconds, something almost imperceptible changes. The eye contact drops slightly. The tone flattens, just barely, into something more transactional. It's gone almost as fast as it appeared, and to anyone only watching the client-facing performance, it would be completely invisible. But that 3-second shift is more informative than the entire rest of the dinner, because warmth that's genuine doesn't have an on-off switch tied to who's in the room and what they can do for you. Warmth that's actually a performance for status does exactly that, and it forgets to stay switched on for the people it decided weren't watching closely enough to matter. The same shift shows up on a phone call. When someone put on hold with customer support goes from warm and easygoing with the person they were just talking to clipped and irritated the second a stranger's voice with no stake in their life comes on the line, then flips straight back to warm the moment the call ends and a familiar face is back in front of them. It's such a small window that most people never think to check it. That's exactly why it works as a sign at all. So line these three up, and something starts to come into focus. Contingent self-worth explains why arrogance needs constant, quiet maintenance. Rivalry explains why it turns cold the instant someone else might outshine it. And the warmth-competence split explains why it only ever slips in front of people it's already written off. None of these are visible if you're watching someone in the moment they're winning, being admired, holding the room. That's exactly the moment both traits are designed to look their absolute best, and it's exactly why so many people spend years unable to tell them apart. Which brings us to the one sign that actually separates them, and it isn't a personality trait at all. It's a single window of time, the 10 seconds immediately after someone is proven wrong, mildly embarrassed, or outshone by someone else in the room. Genuine confidence, in that window, does something almost boring. It absorbs the moment without needing to manage it. A small laugh, maybe. An easy, "I stand corrected." The moment passes and nothing about how that person carries themselves for the rest of the conversation changes at all, because their sense of worth was never sitting on the outcome of that one exchange to begin with. Arrogance in that same 10-second window cannot simply let the moment pass, because for arrogance, the moment isn't small. It's a genuine threat to the exact thing propping up how that person feels about themselves in real time. So watch what actually happens. A joke gets made at their expense, gently, and they laugh a half second too late or a half second too hard. Someone else's idea gets the credit theirs almost got, and their compliment arrives with a small, barely noticeable qualifier attached to it. They get corrected on a minor fact in front of other people, and somehow, within the next 2 minutes, the conversation has quietly circled back to a moment where they were right about something else, as if the record needed to be rebalanced before anyone could move on. None of it is dramatic. none of it would hold up if you tried to describe it to someone else afterward, because on its own, each individual reaction looks like nothing. It's the specific 10 seconds it shows up in that makes it readable at all. Here's the sentence worth sitting with. Confidence is what's left standing after the ego takes a small hit. Arrogance is what shows up to repair the damage before anyone else even noticed there was any. And once you see it this way, it reframes a lot of people you've already met. The person who seemed so sure of themselves in every room, who you couldn't quite figure out, who felt magnetic and slightly unsettling at the same time, without you being able to name why. You were probably watching the right person at the wrong moment. Confidence and arrogance were never actually competing for the same territory in someone's personality. One of them is a state that doesn't need anything from the room to keep existing. The other is a performance that needs the room's cooperation constantly and simply gets better at hiding how much it needs it. Zoom out far enough and this stops being a story about individual personalities at all. Entire workplaces reward the version of self-assurance that's easiest to see on a stage and hardest to check in private, which means the interview room, the pitch meeting, and the leadership panel are almost perfectly designed to select for arrogance while believing they're selecting for confidence. Nobody in that process is lying. They're just measuring the one variable that both traits share and never getting the 10-second window where they'd actually diverge. So here's what you can actually do with this, starting with the very next person who strikes you as impressively self-assured. Don't evaluate them while they're winning. Everyone looks good then. Wait for the 10 seconds after something goes slightly wrong for them, small, forgettable, almost nothing, and watch specifically what they do with it. Do they let it pass genuinely with nothing left over? Or does something quiet kick in to smooth it over, redirect it, or rebalance the record before the conversation moves on? You can even run a version of this check on yourself, which is usually the harder and more useful test. The next time something small embarrasses you, a minor correction, a joke at your expense, someone else getting credit you quietly wanted, notice what your own next 60 seconds actually look like. Do you let it sit, or do you feel a pull to say one more thing, add one more clarification, make sure the room remembers you were right about something else? That pull isn't a character flaw, it's just information, the same information you've been learning to spot in everyone else, pointed back at you for once. That single window will tell you more than an hour of watching someone at their best ever could, because remember where we started. You cannot tell confidence from arrogance by watching someone when things are going well, because in that moment they are built to look exactly the same, on purpose, whether the person doing it even realizes that's what's happening. So think about the most self-assured person in your life right now, the one you've never quite been able to read. Have you ever actually seen what they do in those 10 seconds? Or have you only ever seen them on the days everything was already going their way? If you've never checked, you might be surprised what the next small, forgettable moment quietly reveals. That's usually where the real answer has been waiting the entire time.